This is our challenge, and this is why here in this hall tonight, better than we've ever done before, we've got to quit talking to each other and about each other and go out and communicate to the world that we may be fewer in numbers than we've ever been, but we carry the message they're waiting for. We must go forth from here united, determined that what a great general said a few years ago is true. There is no substitute for victory. Mr. President.
A speech that would go down in political history, Ronald Reagan conceding at the contested convention where he almost took the nomination from President Gerald Ford back in 1976. It was a wild time. The Republican Party was fractured. It was split. It was reeling from the turmoil of Nixon's resignation before his VP Ford took over in the White House, all of that stemming, of course, from Watergate. So going into the convention, Ford had fallen short of having enough delegates to clinch that nomination. Those are the numbers where they stood at that time. And that ensured that there would be a drawn-out battle with Ronald Reagan from California, who felt he should take over that mantle. Frank Donatelli, a former assistant to President Reagan, was the executive director of Young Americans for Freedom at that time, back in 1976, and Craig Shirley, a presidential historian who chronicled Reagan's 1976 campaign in the book Reagan's Revolution. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you all here.
Thank you.
I wanted to get right to it because we're a little short on time because of what we were just watching happening in New York. So, Frank Donatelli, let me go to you first. Give us some examples of what was the wrangling like, you know, the physical, emotional delegate fight that went on at that convention.
Well, Martha, first, thanks for reminding me that I once headed up a youth campaign. That was a long time ago.
It felt good.
You know, in a contested convention, the trailing candidate wants to create chaos. He needs to develop a new narrative so that the delegates don't think that the candidate that's leading is necessarily going to be the nominee. So the strategy of the Reagan forces in 1976 was to pick a rules fight with President Ford that required both presidential candidates to name their vice president prior to the balloting. And there were a lot of Ford delegates, it was thought, that might vote for that, and that might change the dynamic of the race. We came up a little short, came very close, but didn't win. Had we won, the dynamic of the campaign might have changed at that point.
Yeah.
So I would expect for 2016 you might see the same tactics in place by the trailing candidates.
There are great stories about this convention, including how when Nancy Reagan came into the hall, she got such a huge, overwhelming response in that room that the Ford forces got together and snuck, you know, Ford signs into people's jackets and under their clothes so that when Betty Ford walked out, she could compete and get also a huge response. They're just amazing stories. So, Craig Shirley, let me go to you. You know, this frantic sort of battle for delegates, you know, what
Yes.
kind of stuff was done?
Well, there wasn't anything untoward or illicit done, but there was Jim Baker was then head of Ford's delegate operation, and they were wooing about 150 undercommitted delegates, and everything from rides on Air Force One to invitations to state dinners with Queen Elizabeth. They were all invited to. There's one famous meeting where an uncommitted delegate from Suffolk County had a private meeting in the Oval Office with the President of the United States and came out of there with a sewer contract, a federal sewer contract for his town, and Ford got his vote. There wasn't anything, as I said, untoward, but there was a lot of, it was really hand-to-hand combat. Tempers flared on the floor of the convention. Nelson Rockefeller got in a famous altercation with a Utah delegate over a sign. The Utah delegate ripped out the command phone for the New York delegation, and there was Nelson Rockefeller, the Vice President of the United States, in this melee, and he's holding a phone over his head that's unattached to anything else. So it was quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Mississippi delegation flipped, of course, at the last minute. Probably cost, in many ways, Reagan the nomination.
You know, just hearing about a phone makes me realize, Frank Donatelli, that phones don't rip out of the wall anymore. Everybody's got one in their pocket. They're all over Twitter. They're all over Facebook, all over Instagram. How does that change it if it happens this time around, do you think?
Well, the communications will be much better, obviously. We had they're right, there were delegation phones, as Craig said. We had old walkie-talkies, which if you got into the wrong side of the convention hall, you know, the waves might be blocked and you couldn't stay in communication with people. So the communications are going to be better. I do remember, as Craig remembers, The Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, was actually under house arrest. He was very upset, I'm being facetious, but he was very upset that the Ford White House would not fight for in the planks.
Morality and foreign policy.
The morality and foreign policy planks, that's right. The Ford people were so good about picking off individual delegates. One of the Reagan's famous lines was, when President Ford comes to town, you don't know if the band should play Hail to the Chief or Santa Claus is coming to town.
Wow. Well, obviously, Gerald Ford wanted to be elected by the people because he had been thrust into office after Watergate and had not had that until he lost that election. So, Craig, obviously, you know, it didn't work out well. So when you look at this, for your party at this point, what are the lessons? What would you say to them about a contested July convention?
Actually, a contested convention can help a party, provided it unifies at the end. United conventions obviously tend to win in the fall, as in 64 with the Democrats, they won, and the Republicans were divided, they lost. 68, the Republicans were united, the Democrats were divided, the Democrats went on to lose. So I would urge them to do whatever they can to unify the convention. You know, one memorable, very memorable story I remember, and I chronicled in my book, Martha, is that as Reagan is giving that magnificent extemporaneous speech, he's only gone there at the last minute because Ford knows he needs a unified convention. So he waves Reagan down, and Reagan's going to the podium, and he turns to his aide, Mike Deaver. He says, "What am I going to say?" And Deaver said, "Governor, you'll think of something." But as Reagan is giving this magnificent address, which he's talking about very lofty ideas and goals, a Ford delegate from Florida turned to a Reagan aide and says, "Oh my God, we've nominated the wrong man."
Maybe they did, given the way things came out. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Great stories, and we may revisit some of that feeling over the course of this summer. Good to see you both. Thank you.
Great stories indeed.